afternoon. It's 4. I think we're going to get started. Welcome to this cafe. This is a cafe so you can unmute yourself and ask questions as always. It seems like lately no one does. You're all afraid of speaking up, but you can. Trust me, it's not that hard. It's a cafe, so this is also going to be recorded. It is recorded actually, and the recording will be on our YouTube channel. If you go there, there is a playlist that has all the cafes we have ever recorded, with the exception of one, I think, that we could not publish afterwards. So you can rewatch all of them. And this one will be there as soon as the video has been processed, which takes a couple of days. This is a really fun one, fun in the sense that it's about Buggy, and Buggy is something that is near to my heart, let's put it that way. I also created it, so usually that results in very geeky things that are powerful and no one else understands but me. I think in this case, it should also be very useful for other people. So let's get started. This is me on the left, obviously. I'm not going to go over this again. I think most of you know who I am. If not, watch all the other videos of the cafes where I introduce myself. We're going to go to the good stuff today, and that is Buggy itself. I have a very short presentation because this is much easier to explain when we go to Switch and when I do a bit of a demo and I show what happens. That will be much, much easier to understand than if I did the whole thing in a presentation. I just wanted to introduce the concept, and then we're going to go to demo. So what is it? It's a bundle app for Switch. If you don't know what bundle apps are, you should also use our, or at least try our Monday.com app, which is also a bundle. The concept of a bundle app is something that Enfocus invented, where you download or purchase one application from the Enfocus Appstore. And when you look in Switch, you see that there are a number of applications that you can now add to your workflows. So if you go to the Enfocus App Store, you will find something that is called Buggy. If you install that, it is a payable app, but if you install it, and you can install a trial, a 30-day trial, then you will see 3 different apps appear in Switch that you can use in workflows. And they are called Buggy Input, Buggy Reporting, and Buggy Reception. If there was any doubt, I came up with the name Buggy. You will understand perhaps why once we have looked at what it does. So this is not a production app, although you can, well, by now you can leave it in production flows, but it is not a production app. It is an app that is targeted towards flow development and testing, maybe debugging of production flows, as I said. But it is not something that was intended to make your flow more powerful while it is doing production jobs. It is an app that was developed to get you to the stage that you can use your flow for production quicker. That is the aim of it. Yeah? And so there are 3 areas that we tackled with that. And before I go there, maybe I should explain why we did this in the first place. I don't think I have a slide for that, but I did want to explain. Why did we do this in the first place? Well, we've done this because as Four Pees, we develop our own apps. I think we have about 6 or 7 apps in the App Store right now. They're all kind of complex apps, at least most of them. But we also get involved in professional services. So we provide professional services. We provide scripting work and flow design work to either the resellers and the partners that we work with, or with end users directly. And there's quite a few of you in this cafe, so welcome. So we are involved in a lot of this this development, and what that means is that you end up writing a lot of scripts, and then you end up writing or creating a lot of switch flows, and those switch flows tend to become complex. And in many cases, you end up creating multiple switch flows where jobs go from one to the other, and there is a whole complex thing going on. What I noticed about a year and a half or 2 years ago, this is how long this concept goes back. What I noticed is that we spend a lot of time on flow development with things that are not really productive work, testing, making sure that this flow does the right work, the right thing. And if it doesn't do the right thing, trying to figure out why and where it goes wrong. Yeah. And so the idea that I had was, why don't we use our own scripting expertise in order to make our own life easier when we do flow development? And we focused on 3 areas. The first thing, and if you create flows, you will recognize this. The first thing is that to test a workflow, you typically activate it, and then you have to provide input. And this input can come from multiple sources. It could come through email, it could come, but in many cases, you end up making test files and dropping those into an input folder. Yeah. So instead of just activating the flow, you have to activate it, and then you drag and drop files in there, hopefully the correct files, and then it doesn't work, and you have to do it all over again. Yeah, so that the providing flow input, making it easier to get the correct test files into a flow was the first area. And this is important, especially if you have multiple workflows or complex workflows, because you end up with flows that you need to test where the file already needs certain things. Yeah? I want to test flow 3 of a multi-flow setup, and I know that in flow 1, the job gains a data set that is attached to it. And in flow 2, there is private data attached to it. And the only way to test flow 3 is to have test files that have all of this setup done. Yeah? And of course, you can throw a file into flow 1 and wait until it finally gets to the 3rd flow and then see whether it works or not. But this becomes even more time consuming if you do that. So that is Buggy input. It focuses on making your life easier with regards to getting files or jobs, I should say, into a workflow. And I'll show you in a second how that works. The second thing is that in many cases, either at the end of the workflow or somewhere in the middle of the workflow, or a combination of the two, you want to know exactly what is going on at that point in the workflow. And exactly means I want to know how the job looks there. And I want to know what data sets are attached to it. And I want to know what the private data is that is attached to it, and all of these things. And Switch doesn't really have a good way of doing that. Yeah? Of course, I can set a connection on hold, and then I can deactivate my flow and go look at the file that is there. And then, but it's a very lengthy process, and it should be easier. So Buggy reporting and Buggy reception, both of these apps focus on making your life easier for that. The difference there is that Buggy reporting can be attached, was designed to be attached anywhere in the workflow, and you can attach multiple copies, it doesn't matter. And Buggy reception is an app that was designed to be at the end of the workflow, but they both have this reporting feature with them. So they can both show you exactly what is going on with jobs at some point in the workflow. What Buggy reception does on top of that is that it allows to also automatically clean up test data. Yeah? And that's something that you typically want to do at the end of the workflow. So hence a separate application that focuses on not only the reporting, but also the cleanup process. The guideline about this was that we wanted to, like I said, speed up the development cycle. Yeah. So if you think about writing scripts, Switch Scripter does this really, really nicely. I can write code, I can run it, I can see when something goes wrong, fix it, run it again. And the built-in test environment that you have in Scripter does this really, really nicely. The idea was to make sure that we could shorten the development cycle in Switch, just as the test environment in Switch Scripter does it for script development. I created the apps in such a way that they interfere with your flow as little as possible. And what that means is that you don't even have to remove them from the flow once you're done. And I'll show you that. You can just make them inactive, but leave them in there. And especially for a reporting app, Buggy reporting, this is really cool because it means that at these critical points in my workflow, even in the production copy of my workflow, I can leave Buggy reporting in place. I simply switch it off. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't generate test data or anything like that. If there is something that goes wrong and I want to debug my production workflow, I can simply switch on the Buggy reporting app, and my production workflow all of a sudden generates the same reporting information again. Yeah? So they were designed to have a minimal impact on your production workflows. You'll also see this on how they integrate into a workflow. I did not want to create apps where files flow through the app, because that means that you have to modify the workflow once it works. I didn't want that. So all of these apps are designed to be attached to, well, to the side of the workflow if you want. So let's take a look here. Let me get rid of my presentation, and then we're going to go to Switch. Now I'm using, and this is kind of, well, it doesn't make a lot of difference, but you'll see it perhaps. I'm using the script versions of my apps, and that means that I have a property here that you will not see in the app itself. It doesn't have any effect on the behavior of the workflow. So I have a workflow here. It is a very stupid workflow. It just copies some stuff and does some renaming and a rename job and a job dismantler and stuff like that. So it's really just a test workflow with a couple of things that happen. And then you can see that at the beginning, I have Buggy input. Yeah? In the middle somewhere, I added 2 Buggy reporting apps, and at the end, I have Buggy reception. You don't need to use all of them. You can just use Buggy input by itself, or you can just attach a reporting app to it if that's necessary. You can have multiple reporting thingies. I could have multiple output folders and multiple Buggy reception things. It doesn't matter. It's quite flexible in that way. You just attach the things that that you think you know for a particular workflow. So what do these things do? Let's start by the Buggy input part. If you look at Buggy input, and if I look at the properties, there's lots of properties here that you can that you can set up. And this is because this application allows you to input test jobs into a flow, but it doesn't only allow you to input a simple file or folder. It also allows you to set up the whole environment for those things that are input in the workflow. So let's do this one by one. First of all, I get to decide when new jobs are going to be sent into the workflow. And this can be, and this is probably the most useful setting and the one I use the most myself, this can be at flow start only, and that means that every time I activate the workflow, Buggy input is going to input the test jobs that I've set up. But you can also see that I can set it to periodically, and then it works on a timer. So if I want to test a workflow where normally I will have a new job coming in every 5 minutes or so, then I can do that as well. Or I can set it to not automatically, yeah, which feels like it's entirely stupid, because where do the test files come from in that case? Well, in that case, they come from the webhook trigger. This is a very geeky thing, but it is quite nice. I have a Stream Deck connected to my Mac here. And that's, if you don't know what a Stream Deck is, it's the kind of thing that normally is used by gamers and the people that broadcast their game. So it's a little hardware device with, I wish I could show it to you, but it's the cord is not long enough to get there. It's a little device with lots of buttons on it. You can press this button and then it does something. Yeah. So I can program it, and I have programmed it so that in Word, I can click a button and it changes my selection to a particular word style, for example. Sounds really stupid. It is a huge time saver. Why am I saying this? Well, this trigger by webhook can be used with the Stream Deck, for example. So I can press a button on this device, and that will then trigger the fact that new test jobs are input into the workflow. In the same way, I can do this with my phone and set up a shortcut so that when I talk to my phone, when I talk to Siri, it will run a little shortcut and then give me another test file. Yeah. So either automatically or if you're up for that, using a webhook. The next thing is, what do you want to insert into this workflow? And here, again, it is relatively flexible. I can, if I don't care what I have in this workflow, then I can do a dummy job. And the dummy job will be a small text file. I think the text file just contains the date and timestamp for when it was generated. And then this text file is input into my workflow. I can also say I want one job, and in that case, I can select a single file or folder, and then that file or folder is injected. Or I can say many jobs, and if I say many jobs, I can specify the source, which would be a folder, and I can specify the number of jobs that I want to input. So if you have a situation where you know that you always need to input 10 chapters of a book, for example, because that's what your flow expects before it does anything, then I can set it up to do that with this multiple jobs feature. A job can be either a file or a folder. Just as anywhere in Switch, it can be either a file or a folder. Buggy doesn't mind. And then you can see that for these jobs that I want, I can set up the whole environment. So I could say, hold on, if the jobs come here, then they will already have private data attached to it. So I can specify any private data field that I want. The key is on the left-hand side. That's the key of the private data. And then the value that I want is on the right-hand side. And of course, I can use switch variables to determine what the value is going to be. Yeah? So just to be very clear, if I insert this one job that I have selected here, Buggy is going to make sure that it has the private data keys in there that are set under private data. I can also specify data sets to be attached to it. And while this interface looks a little bit wild because I have to specify the path to the data set, it does mean that you can have easily have multiple data sets that you're attaching to a job. Yeah. So in this case, my test job will have a data set called FP affirmation and one called FP API response. And the files that will be attached to it are the ones that I link here. If this is a file, an extension that is recognized as a data set in Switch, an XML file, an XMP file, then the type of the data set will be determined by the extension. If it's something that is not recognized, like this JSON file in this example, it will become an opaque data set. The other properties here work exactly the same. So they all attach particular setup information to the job that is going through the workflow. And that is Buggy input. So you attach it at the beginning of the workflow. You can attach multiple copies if you have multiple inputs. That's not a problem at all. You attach it to the beginning of the workflow. You specify how many files you want to input as test jobs, how frequently, or whether it's just at the flow start, or whether you want to do the geeky thing and use this webhook stuff that I implemented in there. And then you set up the whole environment for that job so that it has the correct hierarchy, private data, emails, user information, and so on and so on. And that job is created, is input into the input folder. And once it is in the input folder, it's a regular switch job. So it looks just like it would come from a different switch workflow, or it could look just like it is dropped in there by some other system that feeds this workflow in production. What do I do when my testing run is over? Well, as I said, you have two ways of leaving Buggy inputs in there if you want. The first thing that I can do is I can simply delete the outgoing connection. You're not going to get any errors in the log. Buggy input is not going to complain. It is simply going to stop providing it's going to stop to try to provide you with test input. And it's going to do nothing, essentially. So that's one thing that you can do. Just break the connection. You can leave it in there. It is inactive until you reconnect it again. The other thing that you can do is that it has a property that is called set on hold. And if I set that to yes, then that has the same effect. Yeah? I can start my workflow and Buggy input is not going to do anything until my property is set to not on hold again. So on the input side, that gives us a test job. These test jobs are going to go through the workflow. And then at some point in the workflow, I want to know what is going on. And that is when Buggy reporting comes in. And I will show you in a second, of course, also what is generated here. But let me explain the principle first, and then we'll look at the results. So here again, I can set this to on hold, and then it will not do anything, or I can, and this is in a way even simpler, break the connection again, and it is again going to be completely inactive until it is reconnected. Yeah, so if you want to leave it in a workflow because you feel that that makes it easier to go back to testing if something bad happens later, then you can, and it will have really minimal impact on the performance of your workflow. It shuts off most of the things that it does. And what does it do? Well, if it is active, I can set up a reporting folder, and it's literally that. So reporting folder, I created a folder here for Buggy reception and for Buggy reporting. The reporting functionality is the same for reporting and reception, as I said before. Yeah, so I created two separate folders. I don't really have to. They could be the same folder as well. But I created two separate folders, and you just pointed to there. And then for each job that passes through the workflow, and remark that it doesn't pass through the app itself. So I don't have to modify my production workflow. I can just at any point in the workflow, connect a reporting instance if I wanted to. It doesn't change the production workflow, and removing it doesn't change the production workflow either. That was important. Yeah? But every job that passes through this point is also sent to Buggy reporting. And Buggy reporting will create a subfolder for each job. Now, I can specify what the name of that subfolder is, but you shouldn't. The default is actually quite good. It's a timestamp that is unique. And so you can just leave it empty, and it uses the timestamp, which is normally very, very useful and easy. And then you can say, and this is my favorite, if you want, you can say, I'm going to have Buggy reporting report everything. Yeah? And if I set it to no, not everything, then you see that I can choose what it is going to be reporting. But I'm not going to explain that here. I will run the flow, and then I will show you what is generated, and we'll examine what is generated in that reporting folder. So the default is report everything. And if you're debugging, I think that's the best thing that you can do because it gives you all the information you could possibly want for that. What it can also do is it can automatically clean up that reporting folder. And this is very useful too, because a thing that I often have typically at the end of a workflow is that you run a workflow, you're testing, you look at the result in the output folder, and then after half an hour of not understanding why your fix doesn't work, you figure out that you're looking at old test data. Yeah. So both reporting and reception have a way to clean up this reporting folder and clean it up either on flow startup, which is really useful because it means that whenever I activate this workflow, it is going to clean up all of my reporting folders. And then it's also Buggy input is going to give me a new test job. So the only thing I have to do is reactivate my flow. All the old stuff goes away, new stuff is generated and is reported on, and I can see what is going on with my latest changes. Again, I implemented this webhook thing here as well. So if I have a flow where I use this webhook, for example, to, as the flow is running, generate new test files at will, this also allows me to trigger the cleanup at will. Yeah, this is a webhook, so you have to call a particular URL, and this cleanup thing that you see here is the last part of the URL that you call. It can be whatever you want, but by default, it is set to cleanup. So that is for reporting. Reception is very, very similar. I also have a reporting folder. I have the ability to create to specify what the subfolder name should be, and you really shouldn't, and leave it at default. I can choose between reporting everything or not everything. And then I also have this cleanup. The only addition that you have here is that I can keep the last X jobs. So I could set this to please save the last job in there. Yeah. And when you do that, it ensures that at all times, you will have an active job in this output folder. And that is, of course, also interesting, because if at some point you want to do flow design and you want to add something with variables or so on, these active jobs can be used to evaluate variables and see what is going on with actual production jobs. So it saves you from, again, having to put something on hold, to have a job in there, and then no, as long as Buggy reception is connected and you have the cleanup set to off, or you say keep last jobs, it will keep X amount of jobs live in your flow that you can use during development. So that's more or less it. What I'm going to do now is simply activate this. Now, this flow makes it so that things are copied a number of times, and so on and so on. So if I go and I look at my reception folder and at the reporting folder, you can see that I have multiple subfolders that have been created for me. Yeah? Remark that I didn't do anything. The only thing I did was activate the workflow. Buggy input, in this case, is set up to inject one job into the workflow. So that's exactly what it did. It triggered all the other actions in the workflow. These jobs are copied between this branch and then the right-hand side branch. So they go through it, they hit one of the Buggy reporting instances, and I get information in Buggy reception as well. In Buggy reception, I get two jobs, one that comes in from the top, one that comes in from the right. And so that means I have two folders in there. And then Buggy reception, I have, sorry, the other way around. In Buggy reception, I have a bunch of copies that arrive there. In Buggy reporting, I only have the jobs that where the file passes through. Now, what I want to show you is what is generated in here. This is one of these folders. So let's see what is in here. First of all, what you get is a copy of the file itself. So this is the file as it was when it hit that app. So we're looking at reception here. Reception is at the end of the workflow. That means that I'm looking at the file as it was at the end of the workflow. If you attach it somewhere in the middle, you're actually looking at the state of the job when it was at that point in the flow. So if I attach 3 copies of Buggy reporting throughout my workflow, you should be able to see what the PDF file looks like at these stages, or you should be able to see that you have a folder with stuff at one stage and then individual files at another stage and so on. Yeah. So that can be quite useful. And you can see that it says rename, so it probably went through the rename thing that I have here, but it tells you what the job looks like at that stage in the flow. What it also tells me is, even without looking at the details, is that this job had 2 data sets attached. Yeah? Remember that we set up Buggy input to generate data sets for me. So these are these 2 data sets that are attached to the flow. And if I want to see what is in this XML file, or I want to see what is in the JSON file that are these 2 data sets, then I can, because it gives me, again, the data sets at that stage in the workflow. Yeah? If my flow attaches additional data sets, obviously those will also be reported on. Yeah? So it looks at the job, it looks at all the data sets that are attached, and it exports all of them for me, which is much easier than having to do that with the tool that you have for that, and then change your flow. You don't have to do anything. You just set up the reporting, and it gives you those data sets right here. The next thing it does, and let me open this in Visual Studio Code, is it gives you a JSON file. Yeah? And I have ideas of giving you a format that is a little bit nicer to look at, perhaps, but if you're creating switch flows, I'm kind of assuming that you can also deal with JSON information. This JSON file gives you all of the information that we know about at that point in the workflow. And when I say that we know about, what I mean is the scripting API can get you a lot of information about jobs. Well, this is all the information you can get with the scripting in the API, period. I was told by Enfocus, or I was asked by Enfocus, why I use the classic environment for this app and not the Node.js environment. Well, for example, because some of this information, like the family stuff and the steps that a job goes through, are not available in the Node.js scripting environment. So I'm using classic, and I'm exporting anything that the classic scripting environment can export for a job. So what you have here, the list of data sets, we already knew that there were 2, but you can see them here as well. So these are the names of the data sets attached. The email address is attached to this particular job. If there is email text, I will see it as well. Maybe you're not aware with the job family concept, but job family means that if I have a job here that is copied, well, actually, I create 2 jobs, and these 2 jobs have 2 unique IDs, 2 different unique IDs. But internally, Switch keeps track of the fact that they originate from the same job, that they are in the same family, if you want. And so this JSON file gives you the job IDs and the names of all of these. So the unique ID and the name of all of the jobs that are in the same job family. Yeah, so I can see that this job that I'm looking at here is part of a family of jobs, and I can see all the names here. It also gives me information about the job itself. The arrival stamp, which means when did it come in? How big is it? What is the extension? Is it a file? If it's a folder, how many files do I have in the folder? What is the hierarchy information attached to it? Yeah? Is it a file or is it a folder? What is the name? The name proper, which is the name without the extension if you haven't used that before. What is the prefix, which is the Switch unique ID? What is the priority set for this job? And what is the workflow state that it is in? So all of these things you can see here. And then probably one, for me at least, one of the biggest time savers of all is which private data is available for this job and what are its values. It's really hard in Switch to get this information out in any kind of quick way. Yeah, this tells you that there's a bunch of private data fields, and this is it. Now, these three come from Buggy inputs. Those are the ones that were set up there. These are a little bit more, well, surprising perhaps if you haven't used that yet. My job was renamed, and if you rename the job, you can ask the tool to save the original job name, and to do so, it creates private data, and this is the private data that it creates. Yeah. So whatever you do with private data, if you are like what we do typically in projects and you store everything in private data so you can get to it in the middle of the workflow easily, well, all of that private data will be visible. You don't need to know what the names are. It will just give you a long list of stuff that is in there that you can use. And then also something that probably you have not used, and I was actually surprised how complete it was and what you could do with it, but Switch also saves steps information. So essentially, whenever a job goes to the next step in the workflow, Switch also stores in the job ticket for that job what that step was and a bunch of information for it. And you can see here what happened to this particular job. Now, this is a little bit of a difficult way of presenting the information. And so I came up with another idea, and rather than looking at the steps information here, I also write out a job trail CSV. Again, I could write a nice HTML file for this, and that would perhaps make it visually a little bit nicer. But I assumed that just as me, you are on a Mac, and on the Mac, it means that I can just hit the space bar and I get this, which actually is more than enough for most purposes. If you are on a Windows machine, I'm very sorry. Give me a feature request and I'll implement a nicer format if you tell me what that would be for you. So this is a CSV file, and it shows the same steps information as you see in the JSON file in the background. Yeah? And what it shows, but here it is presented a little bit nicer. So what it tells me is that this job was produced by Buggy input. Buggy input is a script element. And then I'm using this as the mark moment for the job. So this is time 0, this is when the job got produced. You will see that not all the columns are filled out. This is because Switch doesn't provide you with all of the information for each of the steps. A good example is the success level. If a job goes through a traffic light connection, those are the connections with the 3 little colored dots, red, orange, green, or red, yellow, green, depending on which country you're in. These traffic light connections can tell you what the success level was that the job went through. So did it go to a data out connection, and was it a data out success, warning, or error? In that case, the success level will be in the last column. I don't have any of these connections, so the last column is empty in this case. The second thing that had happened here was that this job was processed. It was processed by an input folder, moved into there actually, and that was at 0.053 seconds after the job creation. Yeah? So the value that you have in the last column always gives you the number of seconds that have elapsed since the creation of the job, since the job entered the workflow. And you can see that the job was then duplicated. It was processed by the rename jobs element. It was moved to the renamed folder. It was duplicated again, and then it went to a some copy folder, and then it went to another folder again. So you can really see what all the elements are that processed this file. If I would go to Switch, you'll see that some copy or original job or Those are the elements, the flow elements in the workflow. So input, some copy, and then output, and so on. If you look at the steps information, you can follow along. Yeah? And especially in a larger workflow where a lot of things happen, the fact that you can also see how long it took for a particular job to go from point A to point B could be really, really useful, because this could allow you to, to see where you have bottlenecks in this workflow, for example. This gives you the timestamp since time 0, but it's very easy from this to derive, well, how long did it take? If from moved to duplicated, I have 10 seconds, then I probably have some kind of bottleneck at that point in the workflow. So this is the information it gives you. You can see that it also gives it to you with a timestamp. So each of these subfolders, as I said, by default gets a name, and the name is the date and time that this subfolder was created. And then we also use the unique ID to make sure that this is unique, and if you have things that happen in the same second, that there is no that there are no clashes. Each of these folders contains the same information, so I can go through it. This is one that went through a different part of the workflow. How do I know that? Well, it was generated by Buggy input again, and then it went to rename job. It went to assemble job, which is right next to it. Then it went to job dismantler. Well, actually, you can see that it goes to rename job, and then the folder renamed, assemble job, the folder in folder. So that is the folder that I have after the assemble. And then it's a bad name, by the way. Then job dismantler, which is the element again, and then it goes to original job, and then from original job, it goes to output. Yeah. So it went through the other branch of the workflow, and you can see that that branch is a little bit slower. From time 0 to the end of the workflow, it took half a second, 0.561 seconds to be exact. And same there, if I look at the JSON file, I have all the information for that job. If it takes a different route and there is different private data, then I will be able to tell. And if I look at, this is reception, but if I look at reporting and I look at the PDF file, then this is the PDF file, how it looks at the reporting stage. Yeah, so I no longer have to only look at the file at the end. I also don't have to put things on hold. I can just connect a Buggy reporting copy, and it will tell me exactly how that file looks like at that point in the workflow. There we go. So this is what I wanted to demo. A very small recap. Buggy is an app bundle. So it is on the App Store as one thing. When you install it on Switch, you will see that it gives you 3 little apps called Buggy Input, Buggy Reporting, and Buggy Reception. And as I said in the beginning, don't expect this to do anything for your production workflow, because that's not what it was designed for. This is while you are creating the workflow, testing the workflow, and getting the problems out of it. Of course, we are all really good at creating flows, and we never create flows that have problems. But in the off chance that you find yourself with the need to test something or debug something, then these Buggy apps can save you hours of time. If you think that I'm just saying hours of time, trust me, I'm not. We started working on Buggy, like I said, a year and a half or 2 years ago. I use it in almost all of the flows that I build because it just saves you so much time in the whole debugging cycle. It gets much quicker. Like I said, the only thing I have to do is deactivate the flow, do whatever changes I want, and then reactivate it. And on the right-hand side, if you were quick, you could see that that means that it is going to delete everything there, and then it's going to give me new test files and send them into the workflow and so on. Yeah. So that makes the whole cycle a lot quicker. If you have any questions, now would be a really good time to ask them, because otherwise I'm going to stop this cafe. If you play with Buggy and you think of things that would be useful, but we have not implemented, then feel free to reach out. I put in Buggy at the moment all the things that I thought were useful. Yeah? And we added quite a few things in there. But if there are things that you think would also be useful, then let me know, and I will see if it's possible. So some questions. First from Axel. Hi Axel, I can see that your mic doesn't work. Have you switched it off and turned it on again? And that usually works. Let's see what your question is. Can Buggy also report what happens in third-party configurators in order to know if a fix-up worked fine? It cannot at the moment, and the reason it cannot is because what you would need to do, and there might be a possibility, but what you would need to do is also look at the log, I think, from Switch, and maybe include the information from the log in this subfolder as well. That would give you a quick way of seeing what log messages did I get, and is there anything in there that is an error message, for example. I need to look at the Switch API that you have in scripting and see whether that is possible to get log messages. I know it's possible using the API. I'm not sure I can access it through scripting, so that might be a challenge, but it would be really cool. I agree it would be cool. And then put it in the CSV file so that you can see these are all the log messages specifically for that file. So at the moment, the answer is no, but I will look into that. It's a great idea. Thank you. And Jan tells me that there is an app for that. Okay. Probably using the API then. I think you don't have access using scripting. I think you would need to use the API, which you can do from scripting if you want to, but I will need to see. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think the scripting API gives you, the scripting itself gives you access. We would have to use the API, but it should still be feasible. It's a cool thing to try and do so. And I appreciate the fact that there is another app that does this. The real power of Buggy, I think, at least for us or for me specifically, is that it brings all of that information together. And so I don't have to have if I wouldn't have to have the messages or the Switch log open, but it will also give me the Switch log specifically for that job, that would actually save me some time again. So I'll look into that. Is it possible to put Buggy input halfway the flow? But of course, the only thing Buggy input does is that it gives you an input file at that point in the workflow. Whether that is the first folder or whether it is a folder somewhere in the middle of the workflow doesn't really matter all that much, to be honest. Yeah, so if you have a very long flow and you want to set up or inject test jobs in the middle of that flow, then yes, you can do it. That's not a problem. And of course, each Buggy input has its own configuration section. So I could modify which test file, I could modify the information that is attached to it, the private data that is set up for it, and so on and so on. So absolutely. And like I said, the same with Buggy reporting, you can attach it anywhere. The same with Buggy reception. If you want to attach it in multiple places, then you can definitely do that as well. Yeah, so play with it. To all the geeks out there, test it, see whether it is useful, and let us know. It's for once, it's an app that we didn't just create because we thought it was interesting, but it's an app that we created because we actually wanted it and needed it, and it saves us a lot of time. So maybe it can do the same for you. I think I answered all the questions. If you're interested in this this get log messages app that Jan mentioned, he also put the link in the chat, so you can get to it directly from there. Let me just see if I missed anything else, but I don't think so. Great. Then this was actually quite short, which is good. For once, it's under an hour, but it's also just a Switch app, so it's maybe technically simpler than many of the other things. There is, of course, documentation for this thing as well. If you want to review what the properties are or how to use it, there is documentation. You can find it on the App Store. Again, if you have questions there, let us know. If you have questions about apps, you can just, I know people like to send me email. It's not that I don't like your email, but I'm not always available. So you can just send questions about apps in general. Any app that we have, you can send questions to support@Enfocus. Yeah, you can send it to support@Enfocus, but they're not going to help you. Support@fourpees.com, and then we'll help you with that. That's it. Thank you very much. There is, I believe, and some might need to help me because I'm not entirely sure. I believe there is still a Four Pees Café next week. This Buggy one, we just inserted somewhere in the middle of it, so my knowledge about what's going on is off a little bit.
Yeah, so next week we have the last one before summer break, in which we'll have the guest speaker, Dietmar from Color Logic, who will be showcasing the new Zebra 10 and everything that's new in there.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I know that my memory is not always perfect. So join us next week. Like Sam said, it's the last Four Pees Café before a summer break that I think we deserved, and you deserve a break from us as well, so that is good. And then during the summer, we will look at what we are going to do after the summer. We already know a little bit because we already know that Callas has some new stuff coming out. And obviously there will be cafes about that as well. So, but the full program we will look at during the summer, and we will get you posted. You will find it on the events page on the Four Pees website. You can always register there as soon as these things become available. If you want to join the Color Logic one, same thing, go to the Four Pees website. There is an events page on there under company, and then you can register for that cafe already. As I said in the beginning, this has been recorded. You'll find the recording on our YouTube channel. If you're not yet a member of our YouTube channel, or whatever that is called these days by all of you youngsters, you can do that. You can subscribe and make sure that you get notifications for all of these videos. So that this one will appear somewhere next week on there. Thank you very much for joining. Download the app, let me know what you think of it, and I will see, I'm sure, many of you again next week for our last cafe before the summer break. If you're already going on vacation, have a great vacation. I will be going when all of you return, so that is good. And I will see you in the next cafe. Have a great day. Bye-bye.